So our next chapter deals with the immune system, and tied into that is something called the lymphatic system, and we'll see how they kind of go together. We really needed our lymphatic system. It's one of those systems we really don't hear much about, other than people talking about lymph nodes, but understanding how that actually is intertwined throughout our whole body is quite interesting. So we'll take a look at that. So the lymphatic system runs everywhere your circulatory system runs. So everywhere blood vessels are, your lymphatic system is running, because all of those areas have the possibility of bacteria and viruses getting in there. So you can see here, right where all your capillaries are, where you do gas exchange, you have tons and tons of lymph capillaries as well. And they're going to take things in that are, they're going to take in water, but they're also going to take in bacteria and viruses and anything else that we need to destroy so it doesn't harm us. And it's going to do that quite well for us. So we'll look at that kind of moving forward. So you really have three parts to your system. Most importantly, you have lymphatic vessels. Those are all the pathways. So every green line that you see down here on the screen, every green line is a vessel. Just means it's just like we have blood vessels, you have lymphatic vessels. You have what's called lymph, which is just a fluid. It's just pretty much water. And then you have what are called lymph nodes. And you probably all know what lymph nodes are. You probably felt a lot of them up in your neck. That's where when you go to the doctor, they always check there. They check around a couple different spots around your throat area to see if they're swollen. And if they're swollen, it tells them that they're becoming inflamed because there's some type of infection inside of your system, and your lymph nodes swell to be able to take in as much as possible and start destroying it. The other thing about your lymphatic system, it's a one-way flow. So with your blood, you have arteries and you have veins. Arteries take away, veins bring blood back to the heart. Well, your lymphatic system is set up where everything just runs to your heart. So from your toes, it's all just going to run up. Okay, now it dumps everything into our bloodstream then, right before it goes into our heart. So your lymph nodes, they are outside of your blood system, your blood vessels, but they have to bring everything back, because after we break down bacteria and destroy viruses, we need to filter it out of our system then. So your lymphatic system is going to break down and kill the bacteria and viruses, and then all of the remnants are going to get dumped into the blood. And then that blood is going to get circulated throughout the body, and your kidneys will then filter it out. Okay, I'm going to link this video down here just in case anybody wants to watch the overview of the crash course on the lymphatic system, which has some pretty good diagrams in it and videos. Okay, so let's look at your lymphatic vessels a little more closely. And what's really important about this is you have to think about your lymphatic vessels are everywhere in your body. So they're kind of just hanging out. They spread out amongst different tissue, and they take in interstitial fluid. So here's your cells, right? Here's a cell. There's another cell, and you have your interstitial fluid, and that's going to make its way into your lymphatic capillaries. Okay. Now, bacteria and viruses, they can travel throughout our bloodstream, but they can also get into our tissues, and this is where we're really going to take them out. So if it's in our interstitial fluid, that will be pushed into this lymphatic capillary, and that will then start to go towards a lymph node, and then it will make its way into the bloodstream after it's been degraded or broken down. Okay. So it's going to take in that interstitial fluid with anything else that we really need to get rid of. Bacteria, viruses, and even some cancer cells that break off. And that's one of the ways in which we get cancer in lymph nodes, which we call lymphoma. That's because it breaks off in the body, and it can make its way into the lymphatic system, or it can actually just start in the lymphatic system, which is a little more rare. So here's our look. You have lymphatic capillaries, or lymph capillaries. So they're right here. They're the ones that are intertwined in all of our blood vessels. It's a one-way flow, so it's going to start to make its way up and through, and it's going to have what we call our collecting vessels, which I put a line through so you don't have to worry about that, but they wind up in lymph nodes, which are large open pockets, if you want to call it that. And inside of there, that's where the destruction of bacteria and viruses really happens. and then you have then that dumps into our superior vena cava. Remember, superior vena cava, that took blood from the head and the shoulders and kind of brought it in towards the heart, into that right atrium. So what happens is your lymph nodes go in through a duct and through a subclavian vein, but we don't have to worry about them. You have a right and a left subclavian vein. That's for those that are taking anatomy in college. You'll kind of learn those main veins as well. Okay, so it goes from a lymph capillary, it makes its way into a lymph node. Lymph nodes destroy that bacteria, and then it gets dumped back into our bloodstream through the superior vena cava. So here's a look at it. All of your lymph goes up and it's inserted into that superior vena cava, really through either one of your subclavian veins, which we don't have to worry about though, right? So there would be the right and the left. That right and the left subclavian veins will then dump into that superior vena cava. So even if lymph, let's say, is coming from your lower body, it's not going into the inferior vena cava. It all goes up and over the heart and dumped into that superior vena cava. That's just the way we're kind of made. Okay, so that's the flow of that lymph. Okay, how does lymph really move? It doesn't have a heart to pump it, right? So how does it get back to the heart? It really gets back to the heart through your normal motions. So as you're moving, even as you're breathing, your muscles are contracting, and that little bit of contraction causes fluid to move. Okay, it's just like if you took a water balloon, right, and you squished it between your hands, that water is going to kind of move. Now, it's obviously going to reset back because it has nowhere else to go. But in your body, as you pump it, it's going to make its way through that one-way system. And they do have small little valves, so there's really no backflow in the lymphatic system as well. So due to your regular movements and your breathing, this lymph kind of moves. Now, what I do want to, the great question that's always brought up is, why should you immobilize a badly infected body part? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't we want, if it's really, really seriously infected, why would we want to immobilize it rather than allow movement? And the answer is because if we start moving it, that means the lymph is going to start moving faster. And if the lymph starts moving too fast, it's going to get into the lymph nodes, but it's also going to run through the lymph nodes. It's not going to have enough time to really break it down and allow our lymphocytes and our white blood cells and all of those cells that fight off infections. It's not going to give them enough time to kill it off. And then it gets into our bloodstream. If it gets into our bloodstream, then it can spread everywhere in our body and cause some serious infections. So if it's a very, very serious infection, we want to kind of slow down that movement of the lymph a little bit. We don't want to keep moving that body part because that's going to speed up the movement of lymph, and it could get into our bloodstream easier than if we allowed it to move a little bit slower. Okay. Now, there's a little bit of a difference between infection and, let's say, an injury where you have edema or you have swelling. If you have just swelling and it's not infected, well, we can, you want to move that blood out of the area because it's pooling. But if it's an infection, that's totally different. Remember, infections, we're talking about the lymphatic system, and we would want to immobilize that so we don't allow it to move too fast through the system and not get killed before it gets back into the blood. Okay. We'll just look really, really quickly at your lymph nodes, and I think that'll finish up this first video. So you have lymph nodes everywhere. You have them here in your what are called your cervical lymph nodes, which is really your neck area. It's your cervical vertebrae. That's where we kind of get the name from. You have it under your arms. You may have had doctors feel underneath your arms for the axillary lymph nodes, see if they're swollen. You have some in your groin called your inguinal lymph nodes. Those will get swollen if you have an abdominal infection, or sometimes if there's complications or problems with pregnancies, your inguinal lymph nodes will swell quite significantly. And you also have ones that are behind your knees, which are called popliteal. Those take care of your leg from your knee down to your feet. That's where your lymph nodes are for that region. Okay. So what's the job of a lymph node? Well, I think I covered a little bit before, but their main job is to hold those bacteria and viruses and allow your lymphocytes to attack. Now here it's showing a cancer cell, but anything, any bacteria or virus that gets into our lymphatic system, we want it to sit in that lymph node and allow the cells to do their job. Okay, so they will destroy that foreign material or those pathogens, and they will also activate lymphocytes after they encounter what's called an antigen. And I'm going to talk about antigens on the next lecture, but an antigen, just as a precursor to it, every cell has a marking on it. So just like your blood cells, you can have A, you can have B, you can have AB, you can be O. If you have A or B blood, you have the A antigen, which just means on the outside, on the outer coating of the blood cell, it has on that coat, you have a sign on it, which we call an antigen. And when your cells kind of come in contact with them, they could tell either you're from our body or you're not from our body. And that's what your antigens do. Your antigen or your antigens are on those cells. So if you look here, all these little bumps on here, you can think of those as being antigens. They're the code to say, okay, I am this type of cell. And your lymphocytes read that and say, okay, you're foreign, and we need to hopefully destroy you before you cause any more harm. Okay, so our lymphocytes are activated after they encounter them. So once these foreign pathogens and these new bacteria and viruses get into our system, our body reads that and then produces a response, which we'll talk about later on in the chapter. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. I'll pick up with the B and T cells and all that stuff next lecture.